Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. My name is TravisShaddox. I'm here. I'm back after a rather long and unexpected break. I was gone for a while, and finally I'm back in Lexington, Kentucky. And I'm well. I was sick. I had COVID, and my wife came in and out, and then she was sick, and it was, life. But I'm back here tonight. Thank you all for being here. I was just reading some of the chat before I got on, and I may not actually mention a lot of the chat sometimes. Sometimes I forget and I lose it, but I do watch it all and read it all. It's good. I like it. Some of you guys you're having my type of humor for sure. So I appreciate everybody being here tonight. So I'll be back. I'll be here this week, and then I'll be back next week, next Monday and Tuesday as well. And then I'll have another little break there, and then I'll be back to normal routines. So I'll be here I'm here this week and next week. We're going to be going over some news tonight, some fertilizer news in the world, and we're going to be going over one of the lawn care nut videos that I was asked to go over from an email. So we're going to be going over that tonight, and a lot of it has to do with potassium. Some of it has to do with iron. So we're going to be talking quite a bit about potassium tonight, okay? If you have a question, put it in the chat, and I will do my best to address it. I know I missed one of Chuck's questions yesterday morning on the members only stream, but I put that in the next comments video, Chuck. So I'm sorry I missed your question, but I did add it already to the comments list for the next comments video. So I will address your question then. And so, yeah, put your questions in the chat. I'll do my best to answer them as I go, or maybe at the end. But yeah, welcome one, welcome all. Super TA says, hello, Travis, long time no see. It's that time. Yeah. Thanks for being here, Super TA. One of the original subscribers and followers of the show, Super TA there. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And then John Fetter has a nice little comment. Uncle Al's motto, a fool and his money are welcome every time. I like that. So yeah, just do your best. If you want to send a little comment or question in the chat, I'll do my best to answer it if I can. But I'm a one-man show here, so sometimes I just miss it. Okay, let's get started. I have quite a bit to go through tonight. We're going to start with some news tonight, and I'm working on some things for the show to kind of have it look a little nicer and transition a little nicer. But for now, we're just going to skip straight to the news. So the news tonight is from Reuters. I'm going to go over this article. It's very timely, and it has to do with fertilizers, and it has to do with potassium. So if you're buying fertilizers for this spring or this summer and you're doing your rounds, you may have heard on my show that a lot of what you're going to see is in terms of value to the turfgrass, is from nitrogen. And potassium is rarely ever warranted. Most of the time with potassium, you're going to see absolutely nothing happen beneficially. Occasionally, you will see something happen beneficially. Occasionally, winter kill the risk can be reduced. Every now and then, you might see a little bit of a benefit from potassium, particularly on low-K soils. If you do have low-K soils, if your potassium levels are in the teens and maybe like 3 parts per million, then you may have potassium deficiencies. I don't want to reduce that value. I mean, to overlook that. It's possible. But it's so rare, it's silly almost to even talk about it. You're actually more likely to see harm in your turf grass by applying potassium than you are to see more healthy turf grass. The addition of potassium when potassium is already there in sufficient quantities greatly increases the risk of diseases. So keep that in mind. Now, what's happened in the last, month in the United States at least is our current administration is levying tariffs on various countries, particularly Canada. Okay, I'm not going to go into all politics and everything else, but from my understanding is these tariffs are being put in place with some sort of idea or intent of potentially having some of the goods and services generated or produced here in the United States. At least that's been one argument that I've heard. However, in this particular case, when you're talking about potassium, we don't have that resource in the United States. Nowhere near like Canada does. Canada has a massive deposit of potassium, and they supply a great deal of the world's supply of potassium. And so these tariffs, if they stay in place, are going to very likely at least, greatly increase the costs of potassium fertilizers for farmers and for turf grasses. Okay, so let's read through this article and learn a little bit more about how the tariffs can affect your fertilizer if you're using potassium. Okay. The title is U.S. Canadian Farmers Face Soaring Fertilizer Prices and Amid Trump Trade War. This is in Reuters at Reuters.com. Winnipeg, Manitoba, March 6th. With only weeks until spring planting on both sides of the border gets underway, Canadian and U.S. farmers already facing a low grain price are bracing for another economic blow, even bigger fertilizer bills amid a North American trade war. Some farming supply costs already turned sharply higher due to trade tensions between the U.S. and Canada. After threatening tariffs for months, U.S. President Donald Trump enacted 25% duties on most Canadian products on Tuesday, before announcing a 1-month reprieve on some goods, including fertilizers, on Thursday. Canada said on Thursday it will delay a planned second wave of retaliatory tariffs until April 2nd, and that's coming around the corner just in about a week or two. Many U.S. farmers need to add potassium to their soils, so they use potash fertilizer, much of which comes from the Canadian province Saskatchewan. Canadian farmers, in turn, often need to add phosphorus to their soil, so they buy phosphate, much of which comes from Florida. So that's very true. A lot of potassium comes from Saskatchewan. I'm talking the world supply of potassium comes from Saskatchewan. A lot of the world's supply of phosphorus comes from Florida. Saskatchewan farmer Scott Wepworth, who has already been paying high prices for the U.S. phosphate fertilizer he uses to help his canola and wheat fields flourish, now fears prices could spike more due to the trade war. When will this end? How bad will this get? Said Wepworth as he gathered with other farmers at the Canadian Crops Convention on March 5th. Fertilizer is most farmers' biggest input cost. In 2024, the U.S. Department of Agriculture estimated that 22% of total corn production costs come from fertilizer, and that includes labor, machinery, and overhead expenses. The price of potash has risen from $330 per short ton on January 3rd to $348 on February 28th, ahead of tariffs. Now, some of this fluctuation in costs has nothing to do with the tariffs. The fluctuation in the cost of potassium, nitrogen, or whatever the case is, any raw material, is going to ebb and flow. It's going to go up and down annually already. Okay. With the tariffs enacted, the question is the tariff actually imparting an additional cost that you would not have seen already? Whoops. Potash has seen price strength in all the confusion, fear of the tariff, said fertilizer analyst Josh Linville of StoneX. There were strong fundamental reasons for potash prices to rise, but if it was the tariffs fear that eventually caught up with it. Phosphate prices are harder to estimate, but have surged, analysts said, since hurricanes hit the Florida mines and facilities that make the product. Prices in Canada could rise if further Canadian retaliatory tariffs are imposed. Bigger fertilizer bills. The U.S. imports 90% of the potash its farmers use, with 80% of those imports coming from nearby Canada, and it cannot replace those with domestic production. And that's the key. Some things you could argue, like automobiles or chips and things like that. But when it comes to potash, which is a natural resource, it's not produced from the air, in other words. They come from deposits. And the United States can't just presto changeo start creating potassium out of thin air like it can nitrogen. Potassium, we take 90% from foreign countries, and 80% comes from Canada. And potash, Canada right now is building an additional potash mine there, and it's billions of dollars to even create the facility. They actually create an underground city, essentially. And it's anywhere between $6 and $10 billion to create that facility. So even if the United States had the resources here, which we don't, it would take many, many years, if not decades, to build the facility, and billions of dollars to build the facility, to even mine the potassium, to not have to go get it somewhere else. But we don't even have it. Okay. So the tariff is going to hit hard on this potassium issue, in my opinion. Full pass-through of the 25% tariff could increase prices by more than $100 per ton for potash supplies sourced from Canada, said a February 4th analysis by a team from the University of Illinois and Ohio State University. Farmers only make money on the difference between what they pay to grow a crop and what they can sell it for. So increasing costs by $100 per ton would be a major hit on farmer incomes. I don't buy that argument, because the farmer's they better not eat that increase in cost. They better pass it along to the consumer, because if they eat that difference in cost, they just lost all the profit, and farmers are going to go bankrupt. We're not going to have farmers. So I'm assuming that the farmer, if they're wise, they're going to pass that along to the consumer. While Canada is not the only potash supplier to the United States, it is the closest. Russia and Belarus are the other major players, but they have been affected by the war in Ukraine, with sanctions and port bans hurting those countries' ability to export product. Canada imports phosphate from the United States, with other sources like Morocco distant and difficult to receive product from. If Canada imposes tariffs on the U.S. phosphate, that would raise prices for Canadian importers and farmers. Fertilizer companies from Canada rushed to get potash supplies to U.S. wholesalers before the tariffs were imposed, which is smart. So U.S. farmers should have sufficient supply for early spring planting, some analysts say. But they will have to pay the retailers higher prices. The fertilizer industry has known this coming since November, so they've been prepared. And now they're just bracing to see how this plays out, said analyst Mark Millen of the ICIS, a commodities analyst firm. One fertilizer company executive warned U.S. farmers should be prepared for fertilizer prices to jump as much as 25%. We believe that the cost of tariffs will be passed on to the U.S. farmer. Ken Seitz, the president and CEO of Nutrien, said at the BMO Global Metals, Mining and Critical Minerals Conference on February 25th. So that's the gist of the news, and what it means is that if you're going to continue to use potassium, your fertilizer is going to go up. So if you've listened to this channel for any length of time, you've probably been made aware that potassium probably isn't helping your turf grass. It's definitely not helping your turf grass unless there's a deficiency in potassium. Deficiencies in potassium can exist. I'm going to show you an example of that towards the end of this presentation tonight, or towards the end of the show tonight. It's possible they can exist. Okay, I'm not saying it's impossible, but they're very, very rare, and beneficial turfgrass responses to apply potassium are also very rare. So if you've been buying potassium and you go to the store and you buy like a 10-10-10 or whatever fertilizer, and you realize the price went from $30 a bag to $45 a bag or $50 a bag or something crazy, and you're like, what in the world's going on? Remember, you don't have to pay for that potassium because most turfgrass situations don't need it. Okay, so this news article is incredibly important for farmers and for our food costs. But when it comes to turf grasses, with the exception of putting greens or like sugar sand turf grasses that are grown in the coastal areas of Florida where we have no potassium, with the exception of those areas, most turfgrass situations don't see any benefit to the application of potassium, so you can simply go and buy another fertilizer that doesn't have potassium, and you will avoid this anticipated or predicted jump in fertilizer prices that is going to come. Okay? That was the reason I wanted to read that news, because we're also going to talk about some potassium in the video tonight. Okay, let me fix this real quick. I'm going to go back to the internet here and fix this little screen here, because I'm a one-man show here. I couldn't get it all to fit on the screen earlier. Give me 1 minute here, guys and gals. I'll see what I can do about getting this to fit. We will start from there. I imagine I'll have to fidget with it even more, but we'll start from there and see what happens. Okay, so let's get on with the next part of today's show. I believe this is episode 4 of Tinfoil Turfgrass, if I'm not mistaken. So tonight we'll be going over a video from the channel called The Lawn Care Nut. This video is entitled Fastest Way to Get Any Lawn Green. So those of you who may not know, the channel The Lawn Care Nut is ran by a gentleman named Alan Hain, who actively promotes violating Florida fertilizer label laws by applying phosphorus to his lawn. He's videotaped himself many, many times ignoring the law and throwing down phosphorus when it's in clear violation of the law. And so that's who you're dealing with. Basically a con man on the peak of Mount Stupid on the Dunning-Kruger effect curve. So he's going to tell us today about the fastest way to get any green lawn, or get any lawn green. And I'm going to describe and explain very clearly why 1/3 of what he's saying is accurate. The other 2/3 is complete BS. Okay, that's just the way it is. Okay, let's listen to see what Alan Hain has to say about getting any lawn green.
What's up, y'all? I'm Alan Hain, the Lawn Care Nut. Thanks for coming back for yet another week. So today, as I'm filming this is actually one of my favorite days of the entire lawn care year or lawn care season, and that day is Derby Day. It's always the first Saturday in May, and today is May 1st, so today is Derby Day, one of my favorite days, but it isn't because of the running of the ponies or because of any kind of mint juleps.
Oh, Mr. Bond, sit down, please. Mint julep?
You see, the reason I like this day so much is because it signifies a time of unity for all of us. Warm and cool seasons alike coming together for a time of maximum green. Like you see back here. You see, because interestingly enough, this time of year is when all of our grass types, no matter where we live, are kind of either right at their peak or right at the end of their peak. But it's this kind of window right now where all of us are green. And I'm talking about folks all the way up north. You guys are at the peak of your green season, no doubt. Kentucky bluegrass, turf type tall fescue, down into the transition zone, perennial ryegrass, wherever you're growing that type of grass, right now, the later mid-spring, whatever time of spring this is, very beginning of May, this is your greatest time to shine. This is when your lawn will be looking its best. Probably the only other time it might look this good is in the fall time. And you know, if you're somebody that's been doing this for a while, you can keep it looking good in the summer, but right now is peak, beautiful, dark blue-green time for you cool season grass pretty much anywhere in the country. And interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty much true. Yeah, I don't have anything to disagree with on that. There's a time of the year where it just so happens to coincide with both warm season and cool season growth potential, and the spring and the fall too. But the spring definitely can be, the time when your lawn's going to look the best, or your fairways are going to look the best, or whatever the case is. So, I'm all good with what he's saying there. No problem for me.
Enough, when you get down, say into Georgia where folks are growing Bermuda grass, Bermuda's actually a lot slower to wake up than what you guys think. I've talked about this before. With Bermuda grass, it isn't necessarily the heat that is needed because there's plenty of heat. With Bermuda grass, what it needs is longer days. And we are now at that point where the days are long enough. I don't know about where you live, but here the sun is setting well after 8 p.m. now. Well, not well after, a couple minutes after, but a couple minutes after 8 p.m. now, which means the days are much longer. And even the Bermuda grass, which is the most alpha of all, but is also the slowest to wake up, even the Bermuda grass is raging in Georgia right now. Or I should say it's about to peak. You get what I'm saying, right? This is a time of unity for all of us. Of course.
Well, whatever. I mean, it's fine. It's fine. We can all sit around the campfire and sing Kumbaya. It's a time of unity. Whatever. It's fine. It's probably peak growing season for Bermuda grass. It's probably in June or July, but whatever. I'm fine with what he's saying. No big deal.
Down here in Florida, my St. Aug has been looking beautiful.
Yeah, his lawn looks good here. I'm sure if you get up there on it, there's probably a bunch of messes here and there, but he has a lawn spots here and there. But his lawn does look good there. It doesn't look like it's even been cut, and it still looks good.
For several weeks, several months. Well, year round pretty much. But you can see, and I don't know if you noticed, but in last week's video, it was looking a little needy. And that's just me understanding my lawn. After you do this for a while, you kind of learn when your lawn needs something, when it doesn't. You can just sense it. It's like any relationship. You just know when it needs something and you give it what it needs to keep the relationship in line. Do you mean to tell me that...
I don't know what he's saying there about that, but I'm just going to not say anything because I don't know his personal life. I've heard rumors, but I'm going to keep my mouth shut.
Your lawn reacts very much like your wife and other relationships in your world, son. That was supposed to be Dr. Phil, but it may have come out as Hank Hill. And I'm going to show you exactly how I did this, or really how you can do it at your house. And when I say that, I'm going to teach you the 3 primary elements that you need to look for in any fertilizer, not just the ones I sell. Of course, I'll link those below because that's what I do, but you can take the information that I'm going to teach you in this video, go to any store and find the 3 elements that I'm going to talk to you about today that turn the lawn green. And the idea here is that just because this is May 1st, we also have another very important day coming up at the very end of this month, and that is Memorial Day. Memorial Day is one of those days when you really want to have your lawn shining. If May 1st, Derby Day, is an awesome day, one of my favorite days, Memorial Day is one of my other favorite days, second favorite days. Think of it like the 1-2 punch of May. I'm going to teach you how to do the 1-2 punch in May to get your lawn as green as possible, and now is the time to maximize it, no matter what your grass type is, and no matter where you live.
Okay, well, let's hear it. I want to know what I got to do to get my grass green. Everybody wants to know that. Let's hear it. Let's hear it, Alan.
Whew, rattled that one off. too many cigars lately. All right, so I wanted to stop over here for a second. This is my Project Lawn Zoysia, and you can see how green this is, and I'm going to tell you exactly how this got so green. And that is mostly because of nitrogen. And
yeah, now I remember. I remember this video now. I remember why I said this yesterday on the members only stream, where I know exactly why I got the email to go over this particular video. And I'm sure a lot of the viewers know why too. And all I can say is I was asked to go over this video by, I believe it was a member. So I'm going over it, but I know why I was asked. Okay. So let's just move on.
that's what this particular lawn needed for sure. Zoysia, just like Bermuda, is a little bit slower to get going. Even though down here in Florida, things are still are plenty warm and we have long days and all that kind of stuff. The Zoysia, at least this Zoysia here, I have noticed it just needs a little bit harder kick in the pants. And I started it slow. I like to do that. I started with higher potassium, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I decided...
Yeah, we'll talk about it in a minute. I'm not a huge Zoysia grass fan, I'll be honest with you. I know people that love it, and I know it does better in shade, and it tends to do better coming out of these transitions and so forth. I get that. But I'm not a huge fan of any plant that you don't know how to maintain. And I'm just not that good at maintaining Zoysia grass. It just needs a little bit more care than I'm willing to put into it. I'm not going to go out and spray fungicides. I barely do that now on my tall fescue to keep it alive. So I'm just not going to go out and do that. I'm not going to go and do all the extra stuff you need to do to Zoysia grass to keep it active and growing and healthy beyond what I would do to Bermuda grass. Bermuda grass, it's hard to kill that stuff. So, there's nothing wrong with Zoysia. I mean, I got plenty of people and plenty of friends that have Zoysia grass and they love it and it's great, blah, blah, blah. It's really resilient and love playing on it. That's great. No problem. It's just for me personally, I'm just too lazy. I'm not going to maintain that grass. So, but yeah, he's got Zoysia grass here and, it looks green because he applied nitrogen. Shocker. Also in the news, water is wet and it gets darker when it's nighttime.
Now that the days are longer, it's time to start kicking it in the face with some nitrogen, and that's what I did. Now, I'll tell you, the lawn isn't perfect. This didn't make it perfect. It had some disease challenges, which it still does. I've stopped the disease, and that's another thing, just a quick myth. People think that nitrogen causes disease. I'll link up there in the eye to a video where I talk about that, because that's somebody reading university websites incorrectly.
Well, I wouldn't go too far down those roads, Alan, because you're one of the biggest BS artists on the internet for sure, particularly in lawn care. I mean, you're completely full of it. Nitrogen does not cause disease. He is right about that, but he's very insincere, or he's skipping over something that's very important. And strictly speaking, I can't say anything causes disease. I mean, Keith Richards has been smoking for 60 years and he doesn't have cancer. So we can't say smoking causes cancer. Okay, smoking is a risk factor for lung cancer. But there's plenty of smokers been smoking for decades and they don't have cancer. So you can't say smoking causes cancer. No medical doctor would say smoking causes cancer. It is an extremely strongly associated risk factor with disease, with lung cancer, or with lung cancer, no question. So the same thing goes with nitrogen and Zoysia grass disease. I don't know any pathologist or nutritionist that would say nitrogen causes disease on Zoysia grass, but it is a risk factor. There's no question it's a risk factor. Okay, you can go and read the same extension publications that Alan seems to dismiss and say somebody's reading it wrong. They may be reading it wrong. I don't know who's reading it, but I will say that when you get nutritionists and pathologists in the room, there's very little disagreement that young, fresh, succulent leaves that is a result of excess amounts of nitrogen or pushing the plant, new growth, these things, increases the risk of disease. So if you're going to go out there and hammer nitrogen onto St. Augustine grass, onto Zoysia grass, I would expect to see an increased risk of disease, but it doesn't mean it's going to cause it. That's for sure. So he's right about that. But the same thing with centipede grass. You can go out there and put out 2 or 3 pounds of centipede grass, 2 or 3 pounds of nitrogen on centipede grass and be just fine. Or you could wipe the whole thing out with centipede grass decline. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to cause it, but it's going to increase the risk of those diseases occurring. There's no doubt. And the same thing holds true with like certain insects. So like if you happen to have a flush of growth, as a result of nitrogen or as a result of irrigation or whatever, and it happens to coincide or align with, say, a fall armyworm outbreak, those fall armyworms like those succulent leaves more than the older mature leaves, and you might find that you get wiped out. So it's a matter of balancing the risks, not connecting or associating it to a cause. That's the wrong way to look at it, Alan. So we're not saying it causes it. I'm not even saying iron causes it to turn green or nitrogen causes it to turn green, as much as that's strongly associated with it. It's a risk for that. It's a risk factor. It's associated with it. So you got to look at it in that regard, not looking at it as this is going to cause this. This is going to cause this. No, it doesn't work that way. Okay. We continue.
But, you can see the place where the disease scars were. They're not cured. I mean, that's the whole thing. Nothing cures areas that have died back from either disease or insect or whatever. Those are going to take a little bit longer to come back. But what you can see is that overall, the lawn is looking better. And that is because I put down nitrogen. So
yeah. I mean, it does look pretty good. I mean, for zoysia, I mean, he's got disease. You're going to have zoysia. You're going to have diseases. The best zoysia grass manager on the planet is going to eventually encounter a disease one way or the other. I mean, it's just prone to diseases. It's very hardy. It's very difficult to kill and hurt zoysia. It's very rigid. But once it gets killed, it's hard to grow back. It's slow growing. It's like an oak tree. It's very, very slow growing, but it's very strong. So that's kind of the way zoysia grass is to some degree.
Nitrogen is the first number on the bag of fertilizer. So whether you go to the store or whether you get what I link in the description below, the first number, when you see 3 numbers on the bag of fertilizer, the first number represents nitrogen. And this time of year, right now, May, when we're all running fast, you want that to be higher. You definitely want that to be up somewhere north of 20. Now, there's some different ways that...
I don't know where this comes in north of 20. And I don't, and if Alan is speaking to the average homeowner in a sort of a pragmatic way, then so be it. Okay. But the percentage of nitrogen on the bag is just one part of how to apply fertilizers correctly. The turf grass doesn't grow on percentages of nitrogen. So what I'm getting at is when you say he says you want it high, you want it north of 20%, that's ridiculous. That's absurd. Unless he's just trying to pander to like the most ignorant person on the planet. Like they have no clue what they're doing. So we have to dumb it way down to them so they get it. Oh, well, whatever. Okay. But you can have 46% OO and have huge problems applying it or no problems applying it. It's all based upon the pounds of nitrogen. So I can give you a natural organic that has 6% nitrogen in it and not have any response to it if you apply it at the wrong rate. But if you apply 6% natural organic at 1 pound N and a 46% synthetic urea at 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, you're applying the same amount of nitrogen. Has nothing to do, or the response that you see will have nothing to do with the percentage of nitrogen that you applied it as. It can be 5, 6%, 10%, 15%, 20%, doesn't make any difference. What matters is the pounds of nitrogen that you put on the ground. So I don't know why he's saying 20%. That's very, I don't know, patronizing, or I don't know what he's trying to do with that, but he's not right. You don't apply percentages of nitrogen. You apply pounds of nitrogen, and the percentage is just one part of figuring out. You need to know the square footage. You need to know the percentage of nitrogen in order to apply the correct amount of material over that area. Okay, so forget about the percentage. Think about don't forget about it. Use the percentage to figure out the pounds of N that you need to apply. Okay, if you can apply 20% nitrogen, it can look great if you do it right. It can look great if you apply 5% of the product as nitrogen, but you apply it at the right rate so that it gets the pounds of N on the ground. Okay.
That the nitrogen can be delivered. Some of it can be slow release, some of it can be immediate release, and even those terms are a little bit suspect, but they don't necessarily describe what it is. But
well, I don't know what he means by that. I mean, APCO determines those definitions, Alan. So if you want to argue that, I suggest you campaign your local APCO official and have them change the rules. But unless he's saying, I don't know what kind of slow release it is, Like maybe you don't know if it's methylene urea or sulfur-coated urea or whatever. I don't know if that's what he means by that. But if it's quick release or slow release, that tells me, that material has been tested and it's been determined by AFCO to meet the slow release definition. Now, it might be really, really slow or not quite so slow. Maybe that's what he's talking about. I'm not really sure where he's going with that, but it's not suspect to me. It's soluble or it's quick release or it's slow release.
The long and the short of it is, if you make sure you get a product, and again, if you want to go to the store and get it, please do, something that is higher in nitrogen, you're going to see better results quicker this time of year.
No. That's complete nonsense. The percentage doesn't make any difference. You can get 4600 and it can look great or not change it at all, depending on the amount that you apply. You can apply 4600 at 2.2 pounds per 1,000 square feet and have a really, really good looking lawn. Or you can apply a 4600 at 0.1 pounds per 1,000 square feet and see nothing happen at all. Same thing can happen on these natural organics. If you have a 620 or whatever the case is and you apply it at 1 pound per 1,000 square feet, you're not going to see squat happen. But if you apply it at 20 or whatever the highest the rate is for 1 pound of N, I guess whatever that would be, 20, what is 1 divided by 0.06, whatever that number is. So, it just depends on you need to know what the percentage is to apply it correctly, but don't worry about getting a really high nitrogen percentage or a really low nitrogen percentage. Worry about getting the correct pounds of nitrogen on the ground for the least amount of money. And ironically, it's usually the higher nitrogen percentages. Matter of fact, it's always the highest nitrogen percentage. It's always a 4600 or a 2100 or something like that.
Out of all the elements that we find in fertilizers, nitrogen is the most important. As I have often said, nitrogen drives the bus. All of the other elements ride along on the bus, but nitrogen is what drives them. When it comes to the overall look of the lawn, it's nitrogen that gives grass its basic green color. And that's because nitrogen makes up a large part of chlorophyll. Chlorophyll's the green part of the leaves and the stems that...
That's not true. Somebody look it up. Here, I'll Google it. Let me, what is the, I don't think that's true. Let me Google, what is the percentage of N in chlorophyll? I think it's like, I forget what it is. What is it? 6, here it is, assuming the AI is correct. I went to a seminar today on AI, so it could definitely be wrong. Okay, we learned that today. AI can definitely be wrong. But here's the AI definition or AI answer for the amount of nitrogen in chlorophyll. It says 6.27%. Alan's such a good BS artist, man. He's such a good con man. Let's go back and see what he says again. Let me make sure that I didn't get that incorrectly here.
This time of year.
Out of all the elements that we find in fertilizers, nitrogen is the most important. As I have often said, nitrogen drives the bus. All of the other elements ride along on the bus, but nitrogen is what drives them. When it comes to the overall look of the lawn, it's nitrogen that gives grass its basic green color. And that's because nitrogen makes up a large part of chlorophyll. Chlorophyll's...
Yeah, that's what he said. 6.27%, Alan. That's a large percentage of chlorophyll. No, it's not. The grass is green as a result of nitrogen because the most limiting resource for plant growth in most cases, at least turfgrass growth in most cases, is nitrogen. It's deprived of nitrogen almost, into perpetuity. I mean, it's just always deprived of nitrogen. So when we give it the element or the resource or whatever it might be that it has been deficient in, suddenly you see a flush in growth, flush in whatever, greening and everything else. So that's the reason nitrogen does it. Nitrogen is involved with, of course, amino acids and proteins, and it's an integral molecule or element involved in basically the gasoline of the plant. It suddenly gets a flush of the element that it needs, and it just starts growing like gangbusters. All the other elements it pretty much has available to it all the time, with some rare exceptions. I mean, there are exceptions to that rule, but nitrogen's almost always deficient with the exception of organic soils. So that's the reason that nitrogen causes grass to turn green, is because it is the most deficient nutrient, and it happens to be the nutrient that is holding back the plant. It's like basically having a governor over the plant. It's restricting its growth, like a restrictor plate on a car. You have a restrictor plate on the plant, and it can't grow any faster now. Suddenly the restrictor plate gets taken off, and suddenly the oxygen comes in and it just starts growing like crazy. That's the reason nitrogen turns it green. Not because the nitrogen is a large percentage of chlorophyll, which clearly it's not. He is so full of it, man. I love watching his videos. There's a couple of people I love watching. I love watching him. Who's that guy, the mechanic guy? I love watching him too, man. He comes up with the craziest BS stuff I've ever seen in my life. I could literally, if all I do is go over content from other people's channels that are nonsense, I'm never going to run out of content. I'll be here forever because they just keep pumping out the nonsense, pumping out the BS. And he's at the top of the list for sure.
The green part of the leaves and the stems that you see. Light energy is taken in by chlorophyll and used to make sugars for the plant. We call this photosynthesis. Nitrogen is also very important.
I bet I'd challenge Alan right now, and I would do this for charity. Honestly, if we can get money together and we'll do it. We'll do it for charity. I would challenge Alan right now to do a contest in understanding photosynthesis between him and my 13-year-old 7th grade son. I bet my son wins. I bet he wins the contest, and all the proceeds we'll give to charity. Whoever wants to donate to it, have a completely unbiased, blind test on just photosynthesis. He can take it, and my son can take it at the same time. I guarantee you, my money's on my son. I bet he wins I bet he wins. Seriously. So but here he is on YouTube, educating how many 294,000 views on this video, educating the public on photosynthesis. It's great. It's fantastic.
Important when it comes to regulating plant growth. The more leaf surface the plant has, the more sun it can absorb. And of course that makes sense because that makes the grass thicker. Never forget, nitrogen drives the bus. If you want a green lawn, you'll have nitrogen in every single application you make all year long.
Well, that I can definitely agree with. As much as I, like poking fun at Alan and his BS and nonsense, that is, I'm in 100% agreement with that. I don't really see much benefit to buying fertilizer and putting it on turfgrass if it doesn't have nitrogen in it. And it's very, very rare exceptions, strange, exceptions to the rule. Most fertilizers you put out, the majority of the material going out should be based upon the amount of nitrogen that plant needs from the recommendations from your land-grant institution for that location. So that's true. I'm in agreement with him on that. So give him credit where I find it, where it's due.
So nitrogen is the first number on the bag of fertilizer. So whether you go to the store or whether you get what I link in the description below,
by the way, I want to mention that has nothing to do with what's going on tonight, but he and I do think alike. That's what I said. Alan Hain and TravisShaddox do think alike in one regard. I have this exact same shirt and I love it. I have like 5 different colors of this exact same shirt. People used to make fun of me, and probably still do. My old colleagues at Harold's and all the stuff at UF, they used to kind of poke fun at me because I never wear short sleeve shirts. In fact, I got long sleeve shirts on right now. I almost never wear short sleeve shirts. And in Florida, they're like, how can you wear long sleeve shirts in Florida? Like, how can you not wear long sleeve short shirts in Florida? It keeps the sun off me. I have skin issues because I'm so fair complected, cancer issues. It keeps, and you don't stay hot. You're not hot. The sweat actually stays in your shirt and you stay more cool. So that's a little note for all those skin, doctors out there. I'm doing my best to promote healthy skincare. Sorry. It just reminded me of this. I got to find some way. I'm trying to be a kinder human. I'm trying to find some camaraderie and similarities between me and Alan. So his shirt is something I also agree with. I'm sorry. Oh, Lord.
First number, when you see 3 numbers on the bag of fertilizer, the first number represents nitrogen. And this time of year, right now, May, when we're all running fast, you want that to be higher. You definitely want that to be up somewhere north of 20. Now, there's some different ways.
Yeah, he already said that, but I already mentioned you don't need that. You don't need north of 20. What you need to understand is how many pounds put on the ground.
Ways that the nitrogen can be delivered. Some of it can be slow release, some of it can be immediate release, and even those terms are a little bit suspect. But
he's repeating himself here. I didn't know that.
They don't necessarily describe what it is, but the long and the short of it is, if you make sure you get a product, and again, if you want to go to the store and get it, please do, something that is higher in nitrogen, you're going to see better results quicker this time of year.
He just repeated himself. That's weird.
Okay, now the second element in the fertilizer that you want to look for that's going to help you get the greenest grass possible is potassium or potash.
Oh yeah, here comes the BS. It's going to start flowing. If anybody's ever been fly fishing, there's a couple different height waders. There's like knee high waders, hip high waders, chest high waders. You got to get like brow high waders now. Okay, you got to get your waders way up because the BS is going to start coming through on a 12-inch main line here. Okay.
Potassium does a lot of things for plants, a lot of things for lawns. Let's go over those real quick.
Okay, just keep in mind, guys, from here until the end of the episode, all of this is complete BS. Everything you're going to hear, basically everything you're going to hear from Alan here is complete nonsense. It's BS. It's misinformation. And I think he probably doesn't even know. He's such a con man. It's insane. So he probably doesn't know and doesn't care. But don't believe any of this stuff. And I'm going to explain it in detail after he does his little smoke and dance, smoke and mirrors dance here, okay?
The next element that you're going to want to look for in any fertilizer you purchase is potassium. When you look at the 3 numbers on the bag of fertilizer, potassium is the 3rd, and you're going to want this to be well above 3 or even 4 if you can find it.
No, you don't. You don't. Okay, you don't need it 3 or 4. If you need it at all, you don't need to go by the percentage. You can get 3% and have a great lawn or have a horrible lawn. You can have 60% and have a great lawn or have a horrible lawn. It all depends on how much you apply pounds per 1,000 square feet or pounds per acre. It doesn't make any difference what the percentage is. Plants don't take up percent potassium. They take up grams of potassium or pounds of potassium.
The long and the short of it is potassium reduces stress.
Potassium does not reduce stress, except in very, very rare cases of things like winter kill. If winter kill is going to occur and your soil is deficient in potassium and you have things like POA green, something like that, then you can apply some potassium, get those potassium levels up a little higher, and it can reduce the chances of winter kill. But the idea is it's going to reduce disease stress and drought stress and traffic stress. All of that is one big steaming pile of BS, okay? It's all complete nonsense. And I have an entire lecture. I have an hour. I might have even done it on the show. I don't remember. I have an hour-long lecture of nothing but potassium. And I go over the literature and show. This is all just made up. It's all nonsense. And unfortunately, almost 500,000 people have seen this video of Alan's video. And he's just making stuff up. Okay? Don't believe it. And I'm going to show you at the end some more information to hopefully convince you what I'm talking about.
Free plant can be greener and taller and healthier and look more vigorous, which means it will dominate the stressed out lawns of your neighbors.
Yep. Potassium is a massive waste of money. Massive waste of money. And unless you have a bona fide deficiency where you see potassium deficiency in the leaves, you confirm that with low potassium in the soils, and you're convinced, okay, for good reasons, I might be low in potassium, then maybe. But even when you apply potassium, you almost never see an increase in greening. Almost never. In fact, let me just start right now because I think he's done with potassium. Let me bring this up and I'll start talking about potassium right now. Let's see if I can do this. Nope. Hang on one second. Let me try again. Okay. So on the screen, this might not work. Oh, it did work. Okay. On the screen, I have a grid or a table that I used last summer, I think it was, when I was going over the potassium, topic of potassium. And on here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 scientific papers I went over, and all the citations, the years, and you can go look these up on yourself, okay? For yourself. I have the initial soil K. I have the turfgrass that the study was conducted on. I have whether there was a positive response, a negative response, or no response, okay? And Alan Haynes claiming that the application of potassium is going to give you a greener grass, going to turn your grass green. In this particular literature review, I guess you want to call it that, I have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 studies concluded in their paper somewhere that nothing happened to turfgrass. With soil potassium levels ranging from Olsen of 16 parts per million, Malik 1 of 10 parts per million, Malik 3 of 23 parts per million, Malik 1 of 10, Malik 3 of 18, Malic 1 of 17. So they're very low. In many cases, the potassium is very low already. Okay. And nothing happened. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of these articles concluded that there was a negative response, meaning there was harm caused by the application of potassium. So something negative happened, and in most cases, it's disease increase. The Woods paper is a disease. This Woods paper, 2016. He came on the show and actually talked about his paper. I believe, where's the Johnson paper? This was warm season, or no, this is crimping bentgrass. Where's the warm season one? There was one in here with, I thought there was one in here with warm season. I may be missing it. But there's a warm season here somewhere that ended up having some dollar spot issues. These are all disease-related issues from the result of as the result of applying potassium. So don't believe for a second that potassium is going to reduce your stress. It's going to reduce your bank accounts, what it's going to reduce, particularly with these tariffs going in right now. Okay, but don't have any delusions. Unless your soil is deficient in potassium or your plant's deficient in potassium, the application of potassium is either going to have no effect or a harmful effect. In some cases, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of these cases, there was a beneficial response to potassium. But notice this. The Ebden 2013 was yield. Waddington 1972 was yield. Sartain 1993 was yield. Sartain 2002 was yield. Snyder and Cesar 2000 was yield and quality. And the Schmidt was winter kill. Now, the Kai paper did show an increase in turfgrass quality. So the only two that resulted in quality increases was the Snyder paper and the Kai paper. These are the only two papers that showed an increase in quality. There's nothing showing increase in color, but color is a large component of quality. So color can greatly influence quality. But in most cases, when you see a benefit to applying potassium, it's not a result of color. It's a result of yield. The plant is growing at a greater rate than it was otherwise. Okay? So it's yield, and maybe winter kill if the conditions are just right here in the Schmidt paper with Poa greens. This was Poa greens in New Jersey. Okay? So the short and skinny of it is, with this chart, whatever you want to call it, is telling you the odds are not good that potassium is going to do anything beneficial to your turfgrass at all. The odds are good that it's going to do nothing or actually harm your grass. The odds are incredibly low, incredibly low that you would see an increase in color, which is what Alan Hain, the lawn care nut, is claiming. That's the reason I showed that. Now, you might ask, as some have asked, what does a potassium deficiency look like in turfgrass? Well, let's look at it. This is what a potassium deficiency looks like in turfgrass. This is St. Augustine grass. I had a picture like this years and years ago that was much, much better than this picture, but I can't find it. And why am I convinced that this is potassium? Well, one, you can actually excise all these leaves and actually analyze it for potassium. You can do these one at a time. I didn't do that. But the reason I'm convinced this is potassium is, one, this particular soil is very low in potassium. This is sugar sand around the Panama City area of Florida, the northwest panhandle of Florida. And this is sugar sand essentially with 2 or 3 CEC and very little organic matter. I think less than 1% organic matter or thereabouts, and very low potassium. I can't remember the potassium. I might have it here, actually. Oh, I do. Son of a gun. Look at that. The potassium in these soils were around, well, this one's at 40 parts per million. Yeah, this one's at 30 parts per million. So we're looking at soils that are low in potassium, soils that have very low exchange capacity or ability to retain potassium, and we're looking at a leaf that is showing yellowing along the margin. So I'm drawing on this is the margin, this is the edge of the leaf, and from the edge of the leaf moving in towards the rib of the leaf, we see a fading of yellow to green, and the rib of the leaf is green. Now this particular leaf is also suffering from another nutrient deficiency at the same time, but you can see, so it's not the greatest example, But you can see the yellowing fading into green towards the rib on both sides of the leaf. Both sides of the leaf are showing this yellowing, and it's fading into green towards the middle. And the key here is not just that you see this symptom in the leaf. It's also which leaf you see it on. You won't see this on new leaves because new leaf nutrient deficiencies won't show up like this. You're only going to see this on the older leaves because when potassium is deficient in the plant, it's going to pull that potassium from the older, more mature parts of the plant to feed the appetite of potassium that the newer leaves have. It's going to translocate that potassium into the newer leaves. And because potassium's mobile, that's why the symptom appears on older leaves first. Okay, so for elements that are not mobile, like iron, it can't pull that element from the older leaves and put it into the newer leaves. So the deficiency will appear on newer leaves first. Okay, this is how we diagnose deficiencies or nutrient deficiencies in plants, in turf grasses. Now, on this particular leaf, on this particular plant, it's fairly easy because it's St. Augustine grass. I mean, it's a very, very large leaf. You do this on bent grass, or Poa annua, or fine fescue, it's not easy to see that because this leaf is probably 2 or 3 millimeters wide or more. But those other leaves are tiny, tiny, tiny. It's hard to see that, but it'll be the exact same appearance. It'll be exactly the same on exactly the same leaf, the older leaves. Okay? Now, I think what I want to do here, okay, so now I'm going to skip to the next part of his video because I'm going to come back to that and show what it looks like on iron deficiency and kind of go over that as well. Okay, so potassium is not going to green up your turf grass. Almost 99% of the time or more, you're not going to see any benefit to applying potassium at all. So don't believe anything Alan's saying. Okay, on potassium, he's completely ignorant. He doesn't know what he's talking about, and there's just nothing to say other than he's just conning you into buying a product that you don't need to make money off of you. That's just the way it is. Okay.
So you can see potassium is extremely important, but one of the things that
Potassium is extremely important. Applying potassium to your turf grass supplementally is not that important.
like about it, again, we're DIYers, we have to have the visuals too, and that's part of what all of that I teach is I want you to get a healthy lawn, I want you to get healthy soil, but if I can help you get visual results along the way, then you're going to go further, you're going to go deeper, and you're going to want to explore more and learn more. But I got to get you the visuals first. That's just how the world works, right? So
well, apparently not, because you didn't get any visuals from anybody applying potassium, Alan, and you're doing pretty well from what I can tell. Your businesses are flourishing, okay? And you didn't get anybody to turn any grasses green on based upon applying potassium. At least that's an assumption on my part, but that's a pretty good bet.
Potassium is another one of those, when it's higher in your fertilizer, it's going to give you a green color. And I've always said...
No, it's not. A higher potassium is not going to give you a more green color. See, this is what happens with AI. Like I said, I took an AI seminar today. It just says stuff early on AI. Nowadays it's better, but they just say stuff. And it sounds convincing. It sounds very compelling. And early AI, and I would even argue even today with today's AI, it's just a BS generator. A lot of that is. A lot of it's just BS generation. And that's all he's doing. He's just generating a mass amount of BS. And there's going to be unfortunately, a large percentage of people that are going to listen to him and go, well, yeah, Alan Haynes said it, so it must be true. Okay, it's not true. Go back and listen. Just click on the playlist, the potassium playlist on my channel, and go back and watch it. Watch all the potassium channel. Before I forget, please hit like and subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, and hit like on the like button. Thanks, guys. But it's just not true. Okay, and the literature is replete with information on that, supporting my position.
Many years that potash or potassium gives your lawn a truer green color.
What does that mean? It always amazes me every time. My conscience is just too deep or whatever. I feel bad when I say something. I'm like, that might not necessarily be true. Let me go back and correct that. I feel bad. He doesn't have any of those feelings, apparently. He doesn't feel bad at all. He just spews it out like just nonsense. It doesn't bother him. I couldn't sleep at night. I don't know how these guys do it. It really is phenomenal.
And that's really nice because it's that bottom end green, that nice truest green. Not
What does that mean? What does that mean, truest green? The bottom end green.
hunter green, but just that truest green color, that base layer of beautiful green. That's what potash does when you put it down. Now, I actually have fertilizers that are higher in potassium and a little bit lower in nitrogen, and they get great results too, but only because they also include the third element in our list.
Okay, so now he's going to go to number 3. So we got nitrogen. I completely agree. Nitrogen is very, very likely, 99% of the time or more, you're going to result in a green or darker green grass, no question. Potassium is the exact opposite. 99% it's not going to. In very, 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 very rare cases would it ever do that. Okay. So one positive for Alan, got nitrogen correct. That's easy. One huge, massive strikeout with potassium. It's not going to do that. More than likely, you're going to find yourself going, oh yeah, no, it turned it green. Because you don't know, because you applied it with nitrogen. If you just apply potassium by itself as potassium chloride, particularly potassium chloride, you have almost not zero, but almost a 0% chance of seeing a benefit, unless you have extremely low potassium in your soils and you have a bona fide deficiency. Okay, let's see what the third element is.
Now, when it comes to iron, we're going to mention a familiar term we've mentioned before, and that is chlorophyll. Iron is directly involved in the manufacturing process of chlorophyll and is required for many enzyme functions.
I want to show this. I don't know what this label says. I kind of getting out on a limb here. I don't know I can't remember what this particular fertilizer has. But fertilizer labels like to play tricks. And for those of you who don't know, I used to sold fertilizer for 6 or 7 years. Blended hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different fertilizers, maybe thousands of different fertilizers. I don't even know. Okay. But there's tricks that nefarious people can play with labeling, particularly with iron. So what are those tricks? For whatever reason, I think a lot of manufacturers and fertilizer manufacturers and salesmen, they think that the end user is going to see greater value in the fertilizer if you have higher percentages of nitrogen in the fertilizer. Like let's say you had a fertilizer with 3% iron, and then you had the exact same fertilizer, except now you had 6% iron. Most people are going to go, well, I want that 6% iron. They're going to be more inclined, at least that's what I'm inferring, that salesmen and manufacturers believe the consumer is going to be more inclined to buy one if it has higher iron. Okay. That is complete nonsense. Okay. There's nothing more, it could be nothing further from the truth. Higher iron actually indicates more oxide iron in the bag, which means that iron's not available. But they've caught on to that and they've realized, hey, if we have a lot of oxides in the bag, that's probably not going to result in any greening because oxides have already been oxidized. They're not available to be taken up by the plant. So we're going to have to add something else in there that might convince them that the iron is useful. So then what they'll do is they'll add a chelate or say an iron sulfate, a soluble iron source in the fertilizer bag. So then you'll see this iron, say 3%, and then it'll say some other percentage of chelated iron. But the issue is you can't get the tricks are you can't get high percentages of iron in a fertilizer bag unless you're using oxide iron or sulfated iron. If you use chelated iron, the iron percentage on the bag is going to be very, very low. So what they'll do is the trick is they'll put in oxide iron or say sulfated iron in some cases, but oxide's like 50% iron, and sulfate's like 20 or 30% iron. So they'll put oxides in the bag and get the percentage at like 2.8 or 2.9%, and then they'll put like 0.1% iron chelate in there, so it's an even 3%, even though 95% of that 3% is all wasted oxide. You as the consumer might not realize that. You'll see chelated iron on there, even though it's a fraction of the total, and go, well, there's chelated iron and it's 3%, or there's chelated iron and it's 5%. So they've basically just put just enough in the bag to make the chelate show up on the label, but the majority of it is just completely wasted. That's a little trick labelers and blenders like to use sometimes. In this particular fertilizer label he has on the screen says 3% iron. Okay, so I can't remember the derived from what he has on this particular fertilizer. But I'm going to show you at the end, it doesn't matter whether it's 3% or 5% or 15% or 0.1%. On granular fertilizer, it doesn't make a difference what the iron percentage is. It's all wasted. Okay, it's all complete waste. All right, now I'm going to make an argument why that is on this section here coming up.
Functions in the plant. The biggest reason we as DIYers prefer iron in our fertilizers is because it's what gives your lawn the deeper, darker blue-green color that truly dominates your neighbors.
So this is what's kind of like a straw man. It's a non sequitur is what it is. But what he's saying is iron is what gives it the deeper, darker blue-green color that dominates your neighbors. Iron can do that. Applied iron in a granular form is not going to do that. And so what he's saying is technically true. Iron does that. But what he's referring to is applied iron. And what he's saying is just iron. So it's really a non sequitur. It's really an equivocation fallacy. He's saying something that it means two different things, really. But to him, it's to the end reader, the reader or the viewer of the show, they're thinking it's applied iron, but he's actually just referring to iron. Okay. Applied iron's not going to do that in a granular form. Not going to happen. And I'm going to show a very good case at the end why I have that position.
So iron is what gives lawns that blue-green color.
But not applied iron, not granular applied iron. Okay. Foliar iron can do that, often does do that. But granular iron is not going to do that. Not last week, not this week, and not next week. Never going to happen.
And that kind of balances out the bottom end green that you get from the potassium as well as the straight up green and sheen that you get from the nitrogen.
That's the only part that's true. The nitrogen will do that. All this other stuff's complete nonsense.
When you find a fertilizer that has all three of those in it, you are going to get results. You're going to have a greener lawn within a few days after the application. Now,
well, that's like saying it has nitrogen, it has potassium, it has iron. If you have those three in there, then you're going to see a darker green color. That's like saying sinks are the cause of all diabetic deaths in the United States because everybody that died from diabetes had a sink in their house. This is ridiculous. In other words, the fertilizer he's applying, all the grass is going to look green because you're applying that fertilizer. Yeah, because you're applying nitrogen. It has nothing to do with the potassium or the iron. It's a composition division fallacy is what it is. He's saying that this fertilizer is going to cause this because of all three of these components of the fertilizer. Meanwhile, it's just nitrogen. And that's the reason why, he's spinning it like this, because that's how he makes his margin on these high margin products of NK and iron or whatever else he's selling. When if you just went out to the farm store and bought urea or ammonium sulfate, you'd be doing for a fraction of the cost and getting the exact same response. I just posted something on the member channel, or maybe it was the open channel a couple weeks ago, of urea, and urea blended with ammonium sulfate from a farm store here in town. It was just $1 for a pound of nitrogen. $1 for a pound of N. Super cheap. It's not that expensive. It's probably 15 to 20% of the cost of buying this fertilizer that he's selling. So go down to the farm store, your co-op store, or even wherever you can find it. It's some local store. They just buy straight urea, ammonium sulfate. If you have a potassium deficiency or if you have a phosphorus deficiency, then so be it. You find a fertilizer that has those. But if you don't, which you probably don't worry about it. But they have to convince you that you have a problem. They have to convince you that this potassium and iron is going to result in a dark green grass, or else you wouldn't buy it. Okay? Let's see what else he has to say.
Here's the thing. Each time you see these elements and there's a number on the bag, that number stands for the percentage. So for example, in this fertilizer here at 2406, that means 24% of that bag, everything in that bag is nitrogen, 6% of everything in that bag is potassium or potash, and then you can see here on the corner, 3% of everything in that bag is iron. The higher those amounts, the greener your lawn should be. It's literally that logical, and it is literally that simple.
No, you are ignorant. You are literally one of the most ignorant people I've ever heard, Alan. The percentage is irrelevant. It doesn't make any difference. All the percentage is going to do is to tell you, to give you an idea of how much you need to apply, how many pounds of the material that you need to apply. You need to know it for that. But the higher the number on the bag is irrelevant. It could be high and have great lawn, or it could be horrible lawn, or it could be low and have a great lawn, or have a horrible lawn. You just need to know that percentage so you know the amount of material you need to apply to get the right number, the right pounds of nitrogen on the ground. That's it.
To understand the results that you're going to get. Now, I want you to keep in mind, we're talking about May applications right now. Every single one of you can use the same fert right now. Again, because of what I talked about in the beginning, we're all at peak or just entering peak, or we're at the back end of the peak, but we're all somewhere real close to the peak. So higher nitrogen, some potassium, and some iron is perfect for everyone right now. Now, when you get to...
No, notice this is called illusory truth effect. I don't know how many times he said it. N, K, and iron. N, K, and iron. You have N, you have potassium, you have iron. It's going to turn it green. Potassium, iron. You just keep saying the same thing over and over and over. Even if you know 2 + 2 = 4, if you keep hearing it over and over and over, 2 + 2 = 5, if you hear it for long enough, it might take you 100 years, might take you 1,000 years, but eventually you're going to go, well, maybe 2 + 2 does equal 5. Because they've said it so many times over and over and over. It's called the illusory truth effect. So that's what Alan's doing. I don't give him credit to think he's actually intelligent enough to know that's what he's doing, but that's what he's doing.
Summer, things will change. And if you subscribe to the channel here, I'll talk about that. One really important free resource that you can get right now. I'll link it below. I just wrote a guide on how to read a soil test, but...
Oh, God, I'm done. That's a guide on how to read a soil test by Alan Hain. I'm definitely going to go over that. That's the end. I mean, he's got a good 3 or 4 minutes left here, but he's just going to show, he's going to show sunsets and stuff like that. Yeah. Okay. So he's done. I'm definitely going to go over your how to read a soil test report, Alan. That might take me a while. I haven't looked at that, but that could be gold right there. Okay. Let's finish this up by showing the remaining portion of the iron and potassium stuff. So the potassium, let me see if I can get this up here on this. Yeah, okay. So potassium, I just went over and I showed what potassium deficiencies look like in turfgrass leaves. Now let's look at iron deficiencies. This is about as clear of an iron deficiency as I've ever seen or ever been able to actually photograph. This was again on St. Augustine grass. I think this was classic St. Augustine grass, a really older variety, I believe. And you'll see this striping, okay? These stripes, this interveinal chlorosis is a key indicator of iron deficiency. However, it must be on the newer leaves. And if you go down here and look down here towards the base, can I draw? Yeah, towards the base down here, you'll know this is the first leaf coming out right here. So this is the first leaf, and then this is the third leaf here, and this is the second leaf or whatever. And you'll see this every time. So when you see a striped leaf like this, you almost will never see it on the second leaf unless you have severe cases of iron deficiency. You will only see it on the first leaf. And then when you go to the plant next to it, you'll see it on that plant as well. It's not as if you're going to see it on the first leaf now, and then a little bit over, you're going to see it on the oldest leaf. It's not going to work that way. It's always going to be on the younger leaf. Okay. So it's not just the appearance. It's not just the appearance or the striping. It's the location. Which leaf is it occurring on? And if you don't get it and whatever, I'm sure you can probably Google it and get some basic like a PDF, a cheat sheet of how to diagnose this. But this is exactly what it looks like. And it's very easy to see on St. Augustine grass, as you can see here. But it's not easy to see on some of the other grasses, some of the finer textured grasses, but it's going to be the exact same appearance. You might have to get a microscope or a loop or something to see it, but you'll see it. But one of the best indicators really is to determine which leaf you're looking at first. Older leaf or newer leaf. That will help you more than anything, okay? And then what does the pattern tell you? If it's striped on a new leaf, it's iron. It could be manganese, but it's iron probably. If the newest leaf is all yellow, if it's an even color, like I should get examples of this. These are easy to find. Where this leaf here is the whole thing from side to side and from top to bottom is all yellow, that's going to be a nitrogen deficiency or a sulfur deficiency, which is a nitrogen deficiency. That's going to be something like that, okay? If the color is evenly faded to purple or gray, that's going to be a different deficiency, okay? So it's the location and the appearance. So if you're looking to better refine your program and have justification for applying or not applying elements, it might be in your best interest to actually consider being better versed on these sorts of issues. Now let's look a little bit of iron. This is what happens when you apply iron to turfgrass, iron sulfate to turfgrass. Where's my marker? Here it is. What you're looking on the screen here is basically a leopard spotting effect on latitude 36 Bermuda grass, all these black dots all over this Bermuda grass. And this is a result of iron sulfate landing on this grass. I think I was cutting this at 500, and it's tight, and it's starting to stain this grass. And you can, I didn't zoom in on this, but I have another picture. Each one of these little black dots, inside each one of these black dots, on some of these anyway, there's a fertilizer prill that has not yet completely dissolved, and you can go in there and look, and every single one of those is iron sulfate staining the leaf. So in this particular example where I'm showing the iron deficiency, you're not going to see, let me back up, you're not going to see a potassium response unless the turfgrass leaf is deficient in potassium. But in iron, you can have this deficiency like I'm showing here on the screen, this striping effect, apply foliar iron and see a response. But you can also see a response even if the leaf is not deficient in iron. How is that possible? And the answer is right here, these little black dots. If you sprayed out iron over this, and I do have a picture of Tiff Eagle. I should have put that on here, actually. I have a picture of Tiff Eagle being sprayed versus being applied granularly. And the spray is just an even darker color, and the granular is little dots. And what that's saying is that that's a staining effect. So the reason why you almost always see an iron response, even if it's not deficient in iron, is because a large percentage of that response is a result of staining the leaf, not actually a physiological change in the chlorophyll or the greening of the plant. Some of it probably is a result of that, but not all of it. Okay? A large portion is just a simple staining effect that's occurring on the leaf surface. All right? So that's why you'll see a response to liquid iron almost every time, whether it's deficient or not deficient. But potassium, you won't. Okay? Because potassium sulfate will not stain when you spray it out. Now let's look at iron solubility of iron. This is why I'm saying granular iron is almost completely useless. I'm looking at a graph. It says the solubility of iron sulfate and glucoheptanate in two soils. One soil has a pH of 7.2. Another soil has a pH of 5.3. On the x-axis, we're looking at length of incubation from 1 hour to 3 weeks. And on the y-axis, we have percentage of applied iron. Now what this is, this 7.2 soil, I applied iron sulfate and iron glucoheptanate. And we see here, this is the line. This is it right here. Percentage of applied at 1 hour was 1% of applied iron. And it went to zero, basically. At 1 hour. Not 1 day. 1 hour after application of iron sulfate or iron glucoheptanate in a soil of a pH 7.2, essentially all of it was oxidized out of solution and insoluble and unavailable for plant uptake within 1 hour on a 7.2 soil, sulfate or glucoheptanate. So granular iron sulfate, or if you spray out iron glucoheptanate and it hits the soil, it's gone at 7.2. But look what happens at 5.3. It's like, oh, well, I get it, Travis, but my soil is 5.3. It doesn't matter. 5.3, it was maybe 10% soluble at 1 hour and 100% insoluble at 1 day. So even if it's glucoheptanate, even if it's soluble iron sulfate, even if the soil pH is 7.2 or soil pH is 5.3, all of the iron that hits that soil in the form of iron sulfate or iron glucoheptanate is oxidized out and completely useless. That's the reason I'm saying granular iron, any iron that hits the soil, is not going to turn your grass green. It is not going to happen, Alan. It's not going to happen. Okay, so let's look at one more. This is solubility of the iron EDTA. You could go, well, my fertilizer has iron EDTA in it, Travis, so you're wrong and I'm right because I'm not using iron sulfate or iron glucoheptanate. I'm using iron EDTA. Well, let's look what happens with iron EDTA. If your soil is a pH of 7, then there actually is a little bit of solubility of iron EDTA. At 1 hour, half of it's still soluble, meaning It started up here at 100%, and at 100%, the 50% of it is now insoluble. But 50% is still soluble. And it kind of hangs out here for a day or two and three, and it starts to become insoluble. But there is a little bit of solubility of EDTA, iron EDTA, if the soil pH is 7. But if you move the soil pH to 7.4, look what happens. It just drops through the floor. At one day, only about 20% or so, 15-20% after 24 hours is still soluble. So it depends on the soil pH if you're going to start using chelates, is the point here. So if you have a soil pH of 7.3 or 7.4 and you go, well, I'm going to use a EDTA, you got about a day. You're going to put it out, you got about a day until it's gone. That's what that's saying. If your pH is below that, say 7, 6.5, 6, then you could make an argument there might be some solubility there. But it just so happens that generally we don't see iron deficiencies on soils that have those lower soil pHs. It's generally occurring on soils that have the higher pHs. Okay. So I wouldn't have much confidence in going out with a granular iron source of any kind, even if it is iron EDTA. The only thing I would really have any confidence in with iron is spraying it out. Iron sulfate or iron glucoheptanate as a sprayable, any soluble iron citrate, doesn't matter what the solubility, as long as it's soluble in solution, and you spray it on the leaves, you're very, very likely to see a response to that. Okay, but no granular sources. Okay, it's a big, big no-no. No granular sources of iron if you want to be efficient in your fertilizer program. I'm gonna go back through the questions, and I'm going to answer some of these questions tonight. I have a tendency to skip past these things, and I don't mean to. I just forget. JT says, first time catching the live. Well, live. I enjoy listening to your videos and upload live streams on my morning commute. Thanks, Dr. Shaddox. You're welcome, JT. I don't remember that name, JT, but you're welcome, and thanks for being here tonight. Mike Reagan says, I want my RGS money back. Yeah, well, if you're watching this show, hopefully it's saving you some money. Okay, here's a good question from Wilson Miranda. I've heard about keeping higher levels of both phosphorus and potassium in the soil to reduce issues with fungus. Does that make sense? Okay, so when you're moving into the world of diseases, you're moving outside of my lane a little bit. I'm not 100% confident in providing recommendations on whether or not phosphorus and potassium in the soil will have a beneficial effect on some diseases. I know there's a relationship there, particularly with elements like manganese. Higher levels of manganese can reduce things like take-all root rot risk and things like that. But I wouldn't worry too much about trying to elevate phosphorus or potassium levels in your soil. We got to start thinking about, if you're not already, thinking about feeding the plant. So if the plant is deficient in phosphorus or potassium, then let's apply phosphorus or potassium. But that's not always easily determined from a soil test, okay? So I'm always real hesitant to start making recommendations on nutrient applications based upon a soil test, because that is chasing numbers, okay? So I would have to get a pathologist on here to see if they know of a relationship between soil phosphorus and potassium to give you any better information on that one, Wilson. But it's an excellent question. I don't really have an answer for that. I might look it up, but I don't have an answer for that. Good question, though. Let's see. So Shawnee says, so what you're saying with the first article is I can tell my wife we're saving money due to our phosphorus deficiency. Okay. Yeah. Oh, my wife's here tonight. I didn't see she came in. Oh, yeah. And John Federer reminds me again, don't forget to like and subscribe. Ronald the Red says, if you did everything this guy tells you, you would spend every weekend spraying his 98% water products and spending thousands of dollars. That's exactly right, Ronald. That's exactly right. And that's what he wants. I can't blame him for going out and marketing his products, his goods and services. I'd market mine if I wanted to sell more of it. But that's what he wants. You know, it's sell and spread and throw her down, spray it and spread it and all these other things. If you want a nice lawn, the chances are extremely good you're going to have to apply a little bit of nitrogen to get it to grow a little better than it is naturally. But the phosphorus and potassium, basically all the other nutrients, I would just have those in the background ready to go if I knew there was a deficiency. If there was a documented deficiency, then I'd apply it. Otherwise, I wouldn't. And I don't. I don't apply anything other than nitrogen to my own lawn. So, let's see, anything else? Oh, there's a couple more questions here. Let's see. Oh, maybe Robert Bennett says, I believe he is making a reference or a joke about working with True Green. Maybe he did. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know his background. Maybe. Okay, so maybe I'm off. Marcus Parado. I don't know. I know Marcus Parado. I know Marcus Parado in Florida. Don't think you're the person I know, Marcus. But if you are, you can answer. You can. I would know if you are that person if you can tell me if you're extremely good at playing the piano. If you are, then you might be the Marcus Parado that I know, but I doubt you are. He said, Marcus Parado says, I own a pest control business in the same town this guy lives in. Been doing this since 2007, and I can tell you that I have never pulled a soil sample here that wasn't potassium deficient. Yeah, in Florida. Yeah, it basically along the coastline of Florida, which is basically everywhere, even in the ridge of Florida. You're very likely going to have soils that are low in potassium. And what I mean by low is I mean like you need to get down like 30, 40 parts per million or lower in order to have a bona fide potential deficiency in potassium. So there are locations for sure that are deficient in potassium. And Florida is one of them. It's one of the best places to do potassium research because other places we just don't see potassium deficiencies. So it is possible, but even in those soils, which many of those publications I showed, particularly the Sartain paper, the Snyder and Cesar papers, those papers were conducted. That research was conducted in Florida on low K soils. Remember, the potassium was on the left-hand side of that chart. And I listed all the potassium concentrations in those soils, and they were all very low. And many of them still didn't see a response to the application of potassium, but it can happen. Okay, it definitely can happen. The only places I've ever seen one were in Florida. That's the only place I've ever actually seen a bona fide, well, I actually didn't see the response, but a bona fide response was documented on turf grasses from applying potassium because it can be low. Yeah, that's for sure in those parts of Florida. Oh, here he says again, K deficiency is a problem. Yeah, that's what I was saying, Marcus. Yeah, it is. I don't know where you live, Marcus. Did you say where you live? In the same town. Oh, so you're living like in the Brandon area of Florida. Yeah, that area can be low in potassium. Anywhere along the coast, basically anywhere in Florida, until you get up into Live Oak, you kind of get up in the upper. It's kind of closer to Georgia, north of Gainesville. Those soils can be have a little bit more potassium in them, but still, it's not a lot. But anything down at the bottom and the ridges and stuff and on the edges, you can definitely have deficiencies in those soils because they're such sandy soils. Yeah. Yeah, no, Marcus. Yeah. Oh, I see. There's a conversation between you and Shawnee. Yeah. He says that I understand, but the host being Travis, me, also is assuming that potassium deficiency is not a problem. Yeah, I'm not assuming that at all. Yeah, I don't know if I misspoke or if you misunderstood something, but I'm not assuming that at all. What I'm saying is that when the potassium deficiency occurs, it occurs on soils that are usually Mehlich 3 parts per million, 30 or below, 30, 40 or below. You want to be in the 40, 50 or higher percentage or concentration of potassium. When you get down in the 30s or 40s, you definitely have the potential to have potassium deficiencies. And when that occurs, it's almost always on sugar sands, on just straight beach sands or something like that. That's when you start to see potassium concentrations get low enough to actually see a deficiency in the turf grass. Yeah, that can be the case. Yeah, and Chris Rules 995 says what I just said. Even if a soil sample shows deficiency levels, you still have to confirm a deficiency by checking the turf. And what Chris is saying here, at least what I think he's saying is that the soil test itself, the potassium level on a soil test, with some exceptions, I can have some confidence in it. But just because you sent a soil sample off to a lab and they came back and said your soil is low in potassium, that doesn't mean your soil is low in potassium for that turf grass. You might want to go back and check some of the articles I've already gone over, Marcus, is that a soil test can give me an indication that it is deficient. That's true. But the lab interpreting that number and giving me the recommendation back, I don't know where they're getting that from. When you look in the literature and you take the literature as a whole, that 30, 40, 50 part per million range, something like that, is a risk zone. You don't want to be much lower than that. You want to be at that or higher. And you're right, Marcus. Yeah, you're right, Marcus, that those soils that you're in around Brandon and Bradenton, Florida, tend to be low. They tend to be down in the 30 to 40 parts per million or lower range. So you're in a zone there where indeed you could be deficient. Yeah, I don't want you to walk away with the assumption that I'm assuming that potassium isn't a problem. It is a problem in those soils, but that's extremely small percentage of the turf grass world. The 99% of the world doesn't live in Florida where these sands exist. Okay, so most turf grass situations, you will never see a potassium benefit, a benefit to applying potassium. Full stop. Even like I said, even on those low potassium soils that you're on right now, it's not easy to see a potassium response, even on those soils. Possible, but it's not that easy. Very uncommon. Okay. Yeah, palms are different. Marcus says palms. There's only one. I only know of one palm nutritionist in the world, and he retired. And he has very, very good data on potassium deficiencies in palms in Florida. And that's very, very prevalent, a huge problem in Florida. In fact, on this video, you can see potassium deficiencies behind Alan right here. You can see his palms with potassium deficiencies back here behind him. Probably some magnesium deficiencies as well. So that's a different issue, though. Just because your palms are deficient in potassium does not also mean that the turf grass growing under that palm would also be deficient in potassium. That work was all done in Fort Lauderdale as well. So, oh, you guys are going back and forth. So Chris and Marcus are kind of going back and forth. Yeah, okay. Where did I get? I skipped through here. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Marcus, what I would encourage you to do is that you say you wouldn't put it down if it came out of your profit margins. I understand what you're saying, Marcus. I do understand that. But if what I'm getting, I've worked in Florida. I don't know if you know, but I worked in Florida for 20 years on soils, on turfgrass soils. And I will say that the overwhelming majority of lawn care operators are applying potassium. And the overwhelming majority will never see a beneficial response to potassium. You might be that one person. I'm not saying you're not. I'm just saying that if you are that one person, then great, apply potassium. But you're almost always applying potassium as potassium sulfate. In lawn care, you can apply it as potassium chloride, I suppose. But I would just be careful. Just because you're applying potassium in your program, you're doing it because it's coming out of your profit margin. Very few, I'll say 0.0% of all the lawn care operators I've ever worked with apply straight potassium. They're almost always applying it with nitrogen or with phosphorus and some blend with something else. Very few, if ever. I've never actually ran into one that only applies potassium. So when you're applying it with something else, it's impossible to actually, as a lawn care operator, to actually separate out the effect of potassium from the other elements that you applied it with. So if you're applying potassium as potassium chloride and you see a response to that, then I would want to see that because it's very, very unusual. Okay, very, very rare. And just like I said, just go look in the literature or just go out on your own lawns, Marcus. Go out on your own lawn or a neighbor lawn or client's lawn and just apply potassium chloride at 1 pound a K. Just apply just that on a square and do that 2 or 3 different locations and see what you find. It's very rare that you'd see any sort of effect from that whatsoever. Even on low K soils, yeah. Even on low K soils. I didn't know you guys were going back and forth in here. I'm sorry if there was some sort of debate or argument. Yeah, I understand. It's difficult. Says I'm generalizing the same way this guy's generalizing. I'm not generalizing in the same way. What I'm doing is I'm giving you my opinion based upon my knowledge of the literature. And I just showed you all the literature. I showed you 12 or 14 papers, and I showed you what showed beneficial responses and what showed you negative responses, and majority showed no responses. And in there, in those papers, there's papers from Florida on low K soils, and they still didn't see a benefit to it. That along with, years and years of applying it and working with it and so forth. So I'm not here to say you'd never see a response. I'm here to say that the odds are very, very low, but it's very, very hard when it's kind of like the allegory of the cave. So if you're a slave in Plato's cave and you're looking at the shadows on the wall and you're going, these shadows are my world. This is all I know. You don't realize behind you, there's a whole lot of people behind you outside the cave that are making those shadows. And it's hard to turn around and see a different viewpoint. It's hard to turn around and realize reality or truth is actually behind me, not in front of me. So if you've been looking at that wall for a long, long time, it takes an inordinate amount of courage and critical thinking skills to actually turn around and go, oh, I was looking at the wrong reality. I need to look at it in a different way. So you're not the only one, Marcus. If let's just assume for a second that you're not actually deficient in potassium. I don't know if you are or not, but let's just assume you're not. It's hard to change your position. You can't choose your beliefs. If you believe you're deficient in potassium, you can't change that voluntarily. That's a psychological effect, really, but you can't just switch it and suddenly believe something different. Okay. So it takes a long time to be convinced of something different is where I'm going with that. But yeah, just go back and look at the videos on potassium, Marcus. You might find some value in that, or not, but that might be of interest to you since you seem to be interested in potassium. Yeah, so Nick Hilmo says, I sprayed foliar iron on a test patch and did not see a color difference. This was on 3-month-old rye that had been spoon-fed nitrogen. Well, if it's rye, particularly if it's good growing rye, it's new rye, and it's been feeding nitrogen, the benefit of applying iron or the color change of iron might be very subtle because it's already probably very green and growing a lot. So you might not see a benefit to applying it in that regard. So, but most of the time you will. Almost every time when you spray out iron at the right rate, I'm assuming you're applying it between 1 and 5 pounds per acre iron. If you're applying it less than 1 pound per acre, the difference of the benefits of the change in color is going to be pretty small. Okay. So if the grass is already really, really, really green, the increase in greening is going to be less. The ceiling you're almost already at the ceiling. So moving it up a little bit is going to be much more challenging than if you started a little lower in greening. I don't know the situation that you're in though. So Alex Zamora, a member, says, I applied manganese sulfate with iron sulfate and fulvic acid powder by foliar spray, and I feel the manganese helped absorption. I know this is a fallacy, but can you explain this? So I won't explain it probably effectively to you, but what I'll say that manganese and iron are very similar in their response on turfgrass when you spray it out, or even when you spread it out. The staining effect of manganese sulfate and the staining effect of iron sulfate is almost indistinguishable. And I had somewhere on the channel, there's a video I have where I have a paver and I laid out the various iron sulfates and zinc sulfates and manganese sulfates and everything and showed the staining effect of all these different fertilizers. And iron and manganese are virtually identical. Okay. So you're going to stain grass with iron sulfate. You're going to stain grass with manganese sulfate. So what I would say initially, Alex, is that I don't know if one helped uptake of the other. You may have just simply enhanced the greening because you enhanced the staining on the grass itself. That's my initial thought, is that you probably just had more staining power of the solution. Okay. It's unlikely that the manganese or the iron or much of the manganese or much of the iron actually got taken into the plant itself and turned the grass a different color. Some of it did, but not much. And the reason I say that is because the color change will happen in hours. If you spray that out, manganese and iron sulfate out at like 8 or 9 in the morning, by 11, 12 o'clock, you're going to see a green square out there. Metabolically, plants don't function that quickly. So, but staining does, as I showed you with the iron stain or the iron oxidation on that graph earlier. At 1 hour, all of it was already oxidized. So iron staining can occur that quickly. Iron metabolization and uptake and changing in color in the plant, that doesn't happen that quickly. You got to start creating organelles and creating chlorophyll, and that takes time. But the staining as a result of dissolved oxygen in the water, that happens fast, in minutes. 15, 20 minutes, it's done. So I would say you probably just saw greener grass because you had both iron and manganese staining the grass a little bit. That would be my take. Yeah, Marcus, yeah, he says, I'll check them out. I'm a nerd about turf and ornaments. Yeah, no problem. I appreciate coming by. And there's no harm, no foul one way or the other. We're just here to help. And I don't have all the answers. And I've said before, go by the literature. Don't go by what I say. I can be wrong. I can definitely be wrong, okay? Jonathan Ralston says, would granular ironite be useless on centipede? No, it wouldn't. And I know a lot of the people are going, why is Shaddox saying that? You've told me ironite's useless. The iron in ironite is useless, but there is one percentage of nitrogen in ironite usually. I mean, they're not idiots. I mean, they put in, if ironite didn't do anything, eventually people would stop buying it. Well, they put in 1% of nitrogen in there so that it can do at least something. There's some part of it that will actually impart a greening color, but it's not from the iron. So the iron part of ironite is not agronomically of any value whatsoever, but there is 1% of nitrogen in there. So strictly speaking, there is some value, but it's from the nitrogen, not from the iron. Somehow my screen keeps creeping up. What is the... Oh, Marcus said, okay, so it's a different Marcus. Okay. Sorry. He said you didn't play piano. Okay, well, I know. He said, I don't know you then. Sorry. Okay, here's a good one. Nick Hilmo says, hey, Dr. Shaddox, is liquid sea kelp a waste for lawns? No, it's not. And again, my longtime users are going, what are you talking about? you told me it's not useful. Well, strictly speaking, sea kelp is to say it's a waste for lawns. I wouldn't say that. Hopefully I've never said that. I wouldn't buy it. I wouldn't use it. But if it's one of those things where if you apply it at the exact right time on the right turf grass that has the right stress on the right part of the plant, then there may be some additional benefit to applying sea kelp. There may be. So those are things. So sea kelp has cytokinins, I believe. So if you had a part of the plant that was the plant was, or part time of the year where the root growth was inhibited, like let's say summertime, July for bluegrass or Kentucky or tall fescue, and the root growth was inhibited where cytokinins are generated, well, then maybe applying supplemental cytokinins might be beneficial because the plant can't necessarily generate enough on its own because the root growth is being inhibited. So in that strange sort of perfect storm scenario, the application of something like that might be beneficial, but I would never, ever, ever, ever consider anything like that unless I had the water figured out first. I had an irrigation system in first. I knew exactly I'm applying the right amount, good or bad, high or low. I have the right optimal level of water. My light and temperature are not causing issues with my turf grass. The abiotic and biotic stresses like nematodes and bill bugs and chinch bugs and all these other things, they're not harming my lawn, diseases. And in the soil, I had the nitrogen optimal applications, my phosphorus and potassium in the soil and the plant were accurate. There's nothing else nutrient-wise that's causing problems. I would make sure all of that are at optimum levels and checked off the list first before I ever went down the biostimulant road. I would never, ever go down these biostimulants and biochars and sea kelp and seaweed extract, all these other things. I would never do that unless I had everything else in line first. And then I think if you want to go around and maybe apply these at right times of the year and you maybe see a little benefit during the summer, during the stress periods for that specific product to impart a benefit, then that's probably okay. But I would never do that. Yeah, I would not do that if I were you. It's probably a huge waste of money. the benefit that you do see from applying these products like cytokinins and seaweed, you probably would see the same benefit if you applied just a little bit of nitrogen instead of that, and you would do it for less money. I'm not saying you would, but you might. Okay, so I'd be real careful about checking off the boxes before you get to something like that, like a sea kelp. But yeah, I mean, there's an article going to be coming out very soon that has sea kelp in it. And it's my understanding that there are very beneficial conclusions in that paper by a very well-respected scientist. So I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying that you better have the right situation. Whereas with nitrogen, I mean, unless it's frozen or unless it's dormant or unless it's like heat stress dormant, you're probably going to see a response to applying nitrogen. The odds are pretty good. I'm just saying with sea kelp, the odds are not pretty good unless you know exactly what you're doing. Free for All says, St. Augustine grass is growing in the woods along a nature preserve that does not get fertilizer or sprinkler water, growing in sand and pine straw. Yeah, it's growing fine. It's true. It's growing just fine. The issues with what we do in lawn care, in golf and sport turf and sod production is that we're trying to grow grass probably at a level that's a little bit beyond what the grass would achieve naturally. And in order to do that, we need to give it a few more resources than what it's receiving naturally. That's the only thing. So it will grow in nature. It's just that turf grass growing along the nature preserve, it's probably fine. Would it be okay for someone like Alan or someone who wants a really nice lawn? Probably not. Probably needs a little more resources, but it's going to grow. It doesn't surprise me at all. It's going to grow. I like going back through these. I don't know if this is boring for you all, but I like reading these chats. It's fun. Nah, Marcus, you're good. You don't seem combative at all. I was having this conversation with my neighbor friend today, and we were talking about students and being able to communicate their theses and dissertations in rooms of people who are not in agreement with them, who don't know this. And I was telling him, I was like, I actually prefer to be in a room with 40 people who don't agree with me. I don't want to be in an echo chamber. I don't want to be in a room full of people that agree with me all the time. I'm never going to progress. I'm never going to grow. I'm never going to understand somebody else's perspective. I'm never going to see, what I'm doing wrong because everybody's agreeing with me. I want to be in a room with 40 or 50 people that completely disagree with me. And I want to understand their arguments. Some of them are flawed, as I go over on my comments and emails. A lot of them are completely flawed and errant. But some of them are valid arguments, valid concerns. And what do? I take those arguments, like Marcus Parado. I've learned from your conversation tonight, Marcus, that you have an interest in this particular area, okay, in potassium and soils. And I'm not saying I'm right and you're wrong. You could be right and I could be wrong about potassium imparting and affecting your turf grass. But I want to know the other person's perspective. I know what's in my head. Okay, I know what's going on there. I want to know what's in their head. And I'm in the opposite positions and opposite arguments. And it helps build my argument in my case. Or it helps move my position off of my line to adjust it more towards, a more evidence-based position by hearing the other person's perspective, by listening to other people's arguments. So I don't take your conversation as combative at all, Marcus. I'm here to help. And if I can't help, that's fine. But I don't take your conversation as combative at all. The only thing that offends me is there's a lot of things that offend me, but like if you start kind of people who go down the racist road and the anti-Semitism road, that'll get you kicked off real quick on this channel. So nobody's done that, but as long as we're all being humanistic, I'm good. Last comment, if there is one. I'll go with one of the members. Last comment. Jonathan Ralston says, at Daniel Arnold, talking to Dan Arnold, if it wasn't for all these charlatans out there, I would have never found Turfgrass Epistemology. Well, if there's one benefit to the charlatans, it's that I came on the channels and came on YouTube and started this stuff, I guess. And there's been probably some education. I get a lot of positive feedback. I get a lot of negative feedback as well. But I never wanted to get on YouTube. I never thought about getting on YouTube. I'm writing now. I'm talking. I'm speaking, doing all my stuff I normally do as a scientist. And I was just it was just it wasn't of interest to me. But when I realized the potential positive impact I could have, I got my toe wet with the Grass Factor guys. I jumped on their channel, and then I did some work with turf therapy. I did Rob and Cam were on there, and I was like, man, I really want to do more of this stuff. And so that's how Turf Epistemology was born. I was like, I think I can do something positive for my community and in society by getting on here and talking more about this stuff. So I'll leave it at that, guys. I appreciate everybody. I'll be back next Monday for the members only show. If you want to join that show live, you'll need to be a member, and then I'll be back next Tuesday evening for another video. I don't know if I'll do a video or a scientific article. I'm not sure what I'll do yet, but I'll be back next Tuesday night. All right, guys and gals, have a great week. I'll see the members on Monday morning. Bye.